Hello and welcome to the D
and A of Home Interiors, the podcast which is all about empowering you to make confident interior and furnishing decisions for your home. I'm Audrey, founder of Audrey Whelan Interior Design.
And I'm Deirdre, founder of youfurnish.com, such 100 plus furniture retailers on one website. The DNA of Home Interiors is proudly sponsored by checkatrade.com. If you need help with your next home improvement project, you can search from over 39,000 recommended, vetted and monitored trades on checkatrade.com. What does an interior designer actually do? All the questions that you've ever wanted asked, we are talking with Audrey Whelan on the DNA of Home Interiors today. Audrey, how long have you been an interior designer for?
Wow, I've been an interior designer for 20 years, excluding studying. So if you count that in, 24 years, which feels like an extremely long time.
Wow. So you're going to have loads of experience to share with us and to actually help us understand a little bit more about the role. And it's interesting that you mentioned study. So maybe the step before that I'm going to ask, have you always loved interior design, or how did you know that you wanted to study design? How did that all come about? Tell us your background.
Yeah, okay. So no, I didn't always know that I wanted to be an interior designer, but I did know from a very young age that I wanted to do something in art or design. So certainly when I was in secondary school, I used to say to people, I want to go to art college. That's how I defined it. Now, obviously in Ireland, we tend to say college as opposed to university in England. So that's what I meant by art college. So I wanted to study art in some form after I left school. But my real interests, at that stage were I absolutely loved drawing. I loved sculpture, making things out of anything. I'd spend, hours doing that. So very, I suppose in hindsight, very spatially aware, kind of making three-dimensional things. I was a big lover of jewellery making, actually. And some of my earliest exploits in business were actually selling jewellery. So I used to make it out of Fimo modelling clay, and my mum used to take the prototypes into work and get orders from everybody in the office, and then I would make them to order, and I would also set up stalls at any local events. So that's really the background. Then when I did, luckily enough, manage to get to art college, so that was by doing a portfolio with the help of a really fabulous art teacher at school. I then got a place on a course, which actually at the time was called environmental design. So I didn't even know what that meant when I was applying to the course. But what it did mean was that it was a course with 4 options. So you could do interior design, furniture design, exhibition design, or theatre design. So I really had my sights set on theatre design. But the way the course was structured was it was 4 years for a degree, and the first 2 years were really, really general. So in particular, the first year, like you did fine art painting, sculpture, life drawing, everything, as well as starting to build on skills for a career in your chosen form of environmental design. Then second year, you started to narrow those things down to those 4 core options. I still absolutely wanted to do theatre design. And then towards the end of second year, when we were being asked to specialise, they actually announced that they were changing the course and they were going to reduce it down to just interior and furniture design. And they weren't going to do any theatre design or any exhibition design. So I was absolutely horrified at this. I couldn't believe that, what I really thought, my passion was going to be was just being taken away, in front of my very eyes. So I had a difficult decision to make, whether to specialise in interior or furniture design. And I had to make it very quickly because the end of the year was approaching. So I actually specialised in furniture design, and then I did a smaller portion of my degree in interior design.
That's really interesting, actually, because I'm assuming that not many people would have that sort of a background, and the skills that you get from furniture design must be hugely informative to interior design that you can bring to your clients.
Yeah, well, I've found it really, really beneficial because I've spent a lot of my career working in interiors and then some of it working in furniture. But when I have been on the interior side, what the furniture studies have really helped me with is being able to focus on the furniture side of interiors. So bespoke furniture in a project, also all the knowledge around materials and making is even so useful just generally in interiors when it comes to thinking about, fitting flooring or putting new skirting boards on, or just, having that real insight into how things are made.
Yeah, it's super, super interesting. And I think this is one thing. So people talk about interior design, and maybe a lot of people out there don't realize that actually it is a profession. You have gone to university, you've studied for 4 years. And I think I know in America they use a different term. So they have interior designers, but they also have interior stylists. An interior stylist is maybe what a lot of people over here confuse an interior designer for. Do you want to explain the difference between the interior designer versus the interior stylist?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, the term they often use in America actually for the stylist end of it is an interior decorator as opposed to an interior designer. But I think in the UK, we don't tend to use interior decorator as much, but we certainly would use interior stylist. I think, one of the main differences between an interior designer and then somebody who works as an interior decorator in America or an interior stylist is that the designer, if they have studied as an interior designer, then they probably will be able to deal with the architectural side of interiors, so the more technical side. So whether that's doing detailed drawings, if there's a new bespoke kitchen installation being planned, or, intricate bathroom drawings, the interior decorator or stylist then will probably be perhaps involved in the selection of materials and colour schemes, but, not with the same technical output, if you like. So they may often work in conjunction with an interior designer or an architect or an interior architect.
Okay, so that's really helpful to know. So if I meet somebody who's an interior designer, do you have to have gone to university to call yourself an interior designer?
No, so there is nothing that says in the UK that, you need to have a qualification in order to call yourself an interior designer. And there is a body called the BIID, which stands for the British Institute of Interior Design. And a lot of other countries have the equivalent of this as well. And that's a body where interior designers can choose, if they so wish, to register. Now, there's quite a stringent process to go through to become a registered member, but that is a way then for customers to be able to, search a database of qualified designers should they wish, which is important, of course, if, the whole kind of industry isn't regulated.
Yeah, so that I've come across the BIID, and I know as well it's not just signing up. You have to do regular training as well to make sure that your membership stays alive and that you're up to date with all the latest technologies as well as trends, because of course technologies around lighting and tech in the home can have a big piece. So it is quite a good stamp of recognition to have. So going back to, that's really interesting. We know sort of where you've come from, what got you into interior design in the first place. I'm keen to understand, if I'm an ordinary consumer on the street and I'm looking to hire an interior designer, what should I be looking for when I'm sourcing them? So I can see out, a list potentially at the BIID of interior designers, but what should I be looking for to make sure that I'm getting the right interior designer for me? What advice would you give from the consumer side first?
Yeah, so I'd say, it does depend on what it is that you're looking to achieve. So like we said earlier, there's some designers who will be qualified to work more technically on a project. So if you were thinking about somebody who is going to help you with a bespoke kitchen, like I mentioned, then, that's possibly a different requirement to somebody who you want to help purely on a more aesthetic front. So maybe selections of materials and colours as opposed to the technical side. But if you can establish a designer who has got evidence of doing the types of projects on the level that you're looking for, then I think, try to speak to some of these people as early on as possible. I've often had people contact me over the years who've told me that, they've been thinking about contacting a designer for like a couple of months maybe. And, some people can feel intimidated about making that contact initially. And I think, it's probably very true that, a person may speak to one or two designers who they don't maybe feel that comfortable speaking to, but then hopefully they'll speak to another one or two who they do feel comfortable speaking to. So designers are all very, very different. One kind of negative side of the profession being unregulated, if you like, is that designers are all operating in different ways with different business models, so different ways of charging. So it can be tricky to compare like for like, and especially if you're trying to do this online, looking at people's websites. But I think if you can have some conversations with people, you can it's much quicker and easier then to identify who is right for you. I think rapport is going to be so important. So obviously it's, really good to establish that they can do the type of work that you want them to do. But if you don't get on with the person, then, you're probably not going to find the best sort of outcome for your project. So I think that's the most sensible starting point.
Yeah, it makes sense. So making sure that you're comfortable with them, that you have a rapport, and that you've sort of looked, I suppose, at their portfolio and see that, their style is something that, you can see in your home. So if they're using lots of florals and you're very minimalist, probably not the right fit.
Yeah, although I would just add something to that, in that, a professional designer will be trained and experienced to work to a client's brief. So often I get asked by people, what is your style? And I'll say, well, I am very confident and very comfortable working to an individual brief that somebody will put to me. What I can see has happened myself over time is that once I did start putting imagery of work online of projects I had done, I started to get clients contact me saying they liked what they saw. So they were doing what you were saying and contacting me because they did like it. So that's sort of become, I don't know if you'd call it an echo chamber or what you'd say, but then because I work for those people, then obviously I generate more imagery, which is a little bit like not the same, but of, a similar style, let's say. But I would say, bearing that in mind, then if you feel that somebody's been, maybe recommended to you, maybe you've met them through a network or something, and personality wise, you think they're great, but they have got a lot of florals on their website and you don't like that, I think it's still worth the conversation to see what they say about that. So let them decide. Will they say, oh no, I just really don't enjoy working outside of the types of, projects you see on my website? Or will they say, yes, just like I've said, no, I'm very comfortable working to different people's briefs. So that's back to that importance of that initial conversation.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, actually. So is there anything then from your perspective when somebody reaches out to you, why you might say, actually, I'm not the right person for you, or you're not the right client for me? Is there anything on your side that sort of you've ever sort of said no to a client, or that interior designers do say no to certain types of clients?
Yeah. It's a favorite topic amongst interior designers, I think. Because I think one really important thing for a potential client of a designer to remember is that, often the designers you're contacting are busy and they do have quite a lot of work on. And, sometimes I and other people I know have been contacted in the past by people who are expecting a lot for very little. And and almost with an assumption maybe that the designer will want to do the project so much that they will do that. And I think it's important to not lead in with that, because you don't want to put the designer off. So I think a good designer in that first call will want to hear about you and your project and your goals with that project and what you're hoping to achieve. And the designer will then be trying to make an assessment of how they will fit into that collaboration, let's call it, with you as the client. So, you may see it as your opportunity to pick and choose the designer, but I think it's really important to remember that the designer is also assessing you as a client. And, the more experienced designers will all have had bad experiences. I can absolutely guarantee that. And their experiences that they do not want to repeat. So that might be customers who are difficult to deal with. It might be projects that have really, really tight deadlines. And the designer knows that if they jump in and get involved, they know that it's unrealistic to achieve that. So even if the client was offering to, pay more money or whatever it might be to get it done, the experienced designer will think, no, it's not worth that for my own, stress levels and for my reputation. It's not worth getting involved in a project that isn't going to have a successful outcome for all parties involved.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. And it's good as well, because if I'm a consumer and I want to hire an interior designer, I've not done it before. So maybe I don't know if it's the right fit and I might like, but actually if I have an experienced interior designer who will realize that actually it won't be a successful collaboration, I think that's helpful as well, that that you're assessing on your side as well.
Yeah.
So once you have a fit on that side, what do you actually do? So you've talked about the first step is you really listen to the client about the project, about what they're trying to create, what the function of it is. So is that the first bit? It's 101, understanding what the client wants.
Yeah. So I found, quite often clients will want ideas really quickly. And especially if there are those tight deadlines I mentioned. But it's so important from the designer's point of view to listen and find out information from the client and get a really good sense of who they are, what they want. Often the first thing a potential client will put in an email or say in that very first phone call will not end up being what the client wants or needs. So once that once the scope of the project is assessed further, and more conversations are had, we can then determine, what actually is the route that we're going to take. So, if we did just jump in straight away with ideas, there's a strong chance either that the client would feel that those ideas just aren't right, and that would be because the designer hadn't done enough kind of information finding to begin with.
Okay, that's really interesting. So once you've sort of downloaded all of the brief of the project, let's call it that, where do you then begin? Is it looking at, right, I've got an overall theme that I want to create for this room? Or do you start on a more practical basis thinking this is usage of the room and I need to figure out what furniture and what layout I need, and then on the back of that I'll overlay the theme? Or is it a combo, or maybe it's something completely different? How do you start to think about it?
So, what I probably should have added into your previous question was that as well as the information finding sort of verbally and, communication wise with the client, I would also be conducting a survey of the room or the property in question. So that would involve measuring everything up, taking photographs. So having all of that sort of more technical information to go along with the kind of emotional information and conversational information from the client. So then to lead into your current question then, so what would happen at that point? And so for me, it's very much a process of like the combo approach, like you said. So I love working on everything simultaneously. So I'm developing the floor plan of how we can lay things out, but I'm simultaneously looking at materials and color schemes and styles of, whether it's, let's say, for example, we're doing an open plan kitchen, living, dining room. So I'm looking at styles of furniture, styles of kitchen, and, what sort of flooring is going to go in. So I'm accumulating samples of materials for those things. I'm looking at imagery to do with styles of things. And then I'm assessing the floor plan and I'm looking at some options, because all of those things can impact each other. So if you're looking at a particular style kitchen, it might work really well with like a big island, or it might not. So that's going to impact the layout. So developing these simultaneously. And then what I love to do with a client is what I call a work in progress meeting. So I take all these strands of the project to a certain point, and then we have a meeting, and it's like the client just being able to look in on that progress and see, okay, we've got this option, we can go down this route, and these are the types of materials and styles of furniture and this sort of layout, or here's another kind of avenue, and just get feedback. So back to this idea of being quite collaborative, not that the client feels, oh, I'm so nervous about what the end result is going to be. Like, think of like changing rooms and TV shows like that I think of, sometimes cause people to be a bit kind of intimidated about the idea. So it means they can have input, and also I say it might be that you like the layout in one, option, but you like materials from something else. So, there and then we start to form together. I say we try to make as many decisions as possible in this session to really from there be able to drive it forwards. What we want to do next is we want to have at least a good sense of, are we going carpet or wood floor? Are we going sort of bespoke hand painted kitchen or something else that, we prefer the look of? Are we having certain styles of furniture over others? And then that means we're in a much better position to start actually working on a budget, and also, sourcing more specific items then that actually fit into that concept.
Quick shout out for our sponsor, checkatrade.com. Search recommended tradespeople online with checkatrade.com. Do you ever have the scenario then? So, and again, I think maybe this is a TV show thing that I'm bringing it from, but the designer has an idea that maybe is a little bit risky for what the client might see. So how do you sort of bring them on the journey? Because it is about a bit of surprise and delight. And, if you tell the designer everything that you want, well, what's the point? Why did you hire them in the first place? So surely it is about pushing boundaries. But how do you find the happy place that, you've pushed them enough that they've gotten that delight and that surprise and they feel, wow, I would have never done that. So this is amazing versus this is not me.
Yeah, well, this is probably one of the bits I love most about working with people in interiors. So I think, what I really think about is when we've had those first conversations, and like I said, what people think they want isn't often what they really do want or what best serves their needs. It's what they've seen somewhere else, or just a sort of a more abstract concept they have in their head that they're trying to translate into words. When they see tangible ideas in front of them, that's where, we can really push the boundaries, because, we've got A, B, and C. We can make decisions. I say it's all about ruling things out as well, like saying no and getting it out of your mind, So in that meeting, I'll always make sure that there's some ideas that are on the much more sort of creative end of the spectrum, let's say, or just, pushing those boundaries, because at the end of the day, the client knows they can say no to those bits. That's absolutely allowed. They don't need to feel bad about that, but at the same time, by saying no, if they're very confident about saying no to those things, I think they can sit much happier with that result that they do go for. So if that is the safer, more neutral kind of end result, they're not then going to go, oh, do you know what? Maybe I should have thought about going really dark on this wall. Or if somebody else says to them, oh, do you know what? If I was you, would you not think of doing this or that? They'll say, do you know what? I actually thought about that, but I ruled it out. So that's one of my big aims, for people to explore avenues during this to result in them being really happy and content and confident, with that end decision.
Yeah, yeah. So can you share then where conflicts arise, or where the most likely problems do come from?
Yeah. Which bits do you want?
The juicy bits, Audrey, actually. So you do it on a no names basis. Yeah. It's fine.
So I think actually, one of the main areas of conflict early on in a project, it's usually not between me and a client, but it's often between like the if there's more than one decision maker in the household. So it could be, a couple who, want sort of joint input on the project. And, sometimes people will even say in that first phone call to me, just to warn you, myself and my husband, really disagree over these things. And I am a bit nervous about getting somebody involved and how they'll deal with this. And I'll say, oh, don't worry, I'm so used to that kind of thing. I've got ways and means. And so for me, it's very much then about, in that initial meeting, if there's conflict and arguments and they are quite open about their differences of opinion, I'll say to them, look, don't have any more of these, discussions or arguments. Wait till I come back again. Once we've got these back to the concept of like tangible ideas and we can see things, because otherwise people tend to be saying, oh, I love kind of yellow type colours, but, she doesn't at all. And I'd love to do this here. And she said, no, I hate those kind of colours. I've seen that in my sister's house and I never even feel well in that room. And I'm thinking, hang on, guys, there's like about 1 million different yellow colours. Chances are we're not even discussing the same shade here. So until we've got samples in front of us of actual paint colours or actual fabric colours, and so many times I've come back to a meeting and somebody goes, oh, I quite like that, without even mentioning the yellow discussion. I like that. And the other party will say, that's yellow. I can't believe you like that. And they'll say, oh, I wouldn't really call that yellow. I'd call that has that not got a touch of lime green mustard to it? Yeah. And so I think, so again, when you've got those sort of ideas and actual, physical things you can touch or look at in front of you, it can really help to narrow those things down. So that's the most common form of conflict early in a project. If you were to ask me about conflicts when things are happening on site and you've got a whole load of tradespeople involved as well, then, we could go on for hours talking about that bit.
No, it's interesting. I just find it all so fascinating. And so you've got agreement between the customers, if there's more than one, and you know what the project is and what the design, and now it's coming to sort of execution. Mm-hmm. So how involved do you actually get? Are you on site all the time? Is it a matter of just identifying and then it sort of goes over to execution to, the tradesperson for the paint? Do you buy the paints? Does the consumer buy the paints? Do you buy the furniture? Do they buy the furniture? Yeah. How does all of that come together from an execution point of view?
Yeah, so this is where things really, really differ from designer to designer. So, if you're looking for an interior designer to manage the project for you, or if you're not sure, but you're open to that, I think it's really good to question early on, in those initial discussions, how that works. So my process over the years has mainly been to take full control of the project. So I would budget the whole job, including the supply of everything for that project, and then also obtain quotes from all the tradespeople and include that. So we'd be working with then this, huge spreadsheet of every cost involved. And, that's right down to if we're changing light switches, if we're replacing lampshades on some existing fittings, mirrors, pictures. Some of these details might just have budget amounts in, like where we'd say we want to create a gallery wall over the piano. We're going to put in a budget of £300 to buy some frames, and you can put your own photos in. You know, in another project, it might be like we've got a budget of several thousand to buy some artwork for over that piano. So really, you know, and trying to kind of get that balance overall. So I think that's where it can be really useful to sort of have somebody looking at the overall project budget and really thinking through to everything you want, rather than going, oh, well, the walls will be painted and the few bits of big furniture will be in, and then I'm off. And, you know, you then think, oh, if only I'm stone broke now, I've no money to kind of accessorize the place. And, you know, then I would always, in my days of, you know, managing the projects, then I would be on site. I would bring in the tradespeople and be on site. I would hope, you know, like to be on site maybe a max of like 3 days a week, but quite often that would end up being 4, if not 5 days that I would need to make a visit. So if I was fully managing the project for somebody, then I would be taking on that responsibility that, you know, if a builder called on a Monday morning and said, you know, we've taken the tiling off in the kitchen and we've got a problem now because, you know, the worktop's going to be a bit longer than we thought or something, you know, and I need to go to site and double check some things, then I'd you know, need to prioritize that and go. So that would always be my approach. Other designers would work differently, where maybe they don't purchase everything for the project, so they work just on the initial design side, and then it's over to the client to take over from that.
So you actually purchase all of those light switches, the mirrors, etc., for the customer as well?
So that's, yeah. So, I mean, currently, as you know, now I don't do that anymore. But in all the years of managing projects for people, that's what I would have done. So budgeting for all of that. And then, you know, the client we'd have a staged payment schedule that we would agree over the duration of the project. So there'd be a bigger lump sum up front, possibly like 2 months even before we start on site. And that's where, you know, I would be looking at everything on that list. Say if there's a sofa that was going to take 12 weeks to arrive for that open plan living, kitchen, dining room, you know, I wouldn't be waiting till we had the kitchen in and the decorating was done before ordering that sofa. I'd have my timeline of the project and I'd be placing orders for the things appropriately to line up with when we were ready for them. And then anything like sockets and switches, goods that could be stored, lighting, I'd order as far in advance as possible so we know we have them there when the contractors go on site. The electrician isn't turning up saying, oh, the downlighters aren't here and I've created all, you know, the wirings in place. So trying to avoid any delays like that. And so often when I'd first meet a client, they'd say, oh, ideally we'd like to go on site like, you know, like in 2 months. And I'd say, oh, you know, that's just going to be way too tight a time scale. If we aim for that, what's going to happen is there's going to be decisions that haven't been made, products that are out of stock if the decisions have been made, and we're going to end up with tradespeople on site waiting around, having to go off on another job. Best case scenario, off on another job, you're not paying them extra money, but then your job is delayed. So much, much better to put all that in place, line the tradespeople up for a sensible kind of time scale, you know, within the overall project plan, and then have as little disruption as possible then.
Okay, so 2 questions to follow up with on that. The first is, when you're ordering all the products, I presume they're getting delivered to the site. They're not going to necessarily your house or to their house.
All the small goods I would have always had delivered to my studio, so that I could check all those ahead of time. So again, back to the example of switches and sockets, you know, if you're ordering them for delivery, open the boxes, check they're all correct. So many variants of all these things. I'd usually kind of fire off the list to the electrician. These are the ones. Is this all correct? I've had all kinds of issues over, you know, double, 2 gang, 1 way, blah, 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 dimmers, switches, just, trying to make sure everything's kind of spot on. So I'd get all the small goods delivered so I could check them and make sure they're all fine rather than having extra site visits to and from. And then things like wallpapers, and lighting, and small objects, accessories. But then bigger items like a kitchen going in, or big items of furniture, then arranging for them to be delivered direct to site.
So you mentioned timing, and I suppose this is a really good point because most people probably come too late or on very tight time frames because they don't realize it takes so long.
Yes.
So what is the ideal time frame? Like, how long should people take to actually find an interior designer? Because that's obviously going to be a process that probably takes a couple of weeks that you don't imagine.
Yeah.
And then how long do you need for planning before, as you said, you can go on site?
Yeah, so I would say, obviously finding the designer is going to be just probably down to the individual, just kind of, you can't really put a timescale on that, as in you might find somebody you want, but they're busy, so they can't start till a certain date. I was going to say,
how long out in advance would you need, would a typical interior designer be booked out?
Oh, yeah. Well, if it depends. And probably a lot of designers I know would say, at different times that can vary. So it's not always that you'd be booked out, 2 months in advance. But just to give you an example, like in my studio before, when there was 2 of us working full time on projects, we'd usually have 8 projects running simultaneously. So not all on site, but 8 projects at different stages. So it would not be unusual to say to somebody that it was 2 months before we could start on a project. But then there would be other times if the project was a very small project or if it was extremely local that we might be able to start that quicker. But so I would say, I used to actually have a blog on my website, on my old website, which I should reignite. It was called It's Never Too Early to think about your interior design. So I think if you've got a project coming up, contact the designers. Don't feel like, I can't have a conversation unless I'm willing to book them in right now, because chances are, that's not going to align anyway. So start the conversations. Any designers I know love to get an inquiry from somebody. And if it is like, next year I'm thinking about doing this, I'm not even sure exactly when next year, it's like, great, I'll tell you how I work and then you give me a call. But at least you can say to the client then, give me a call way in advance, so that their expectations, will be met. And then in terms of how long between actually finding a designer or starting with a designer and starting on site, obviously it depends on the scale and the scope of the project, but, I would say a few months would be ideal. So I'd normally say kind of an absolute minimum of like 2 months from that first meeting to be able to start anything on site, unless, it's just a really, really small project. But, that would involve that like initial concept development, that work in progress meeting I talked about, then developing everything from there in terms of sourcing exact items, having that full budget put together, all the site meetings involved in, getting the various trades in, the time lag in them costing up the work, which, sometimes can be a week or 2 for a busy builder to get back with the quote. And then obviously you're subject to their timescales then. So if it's a big project, that might push it out. So that's where it's very difficult to say to a client when they first get in touch, yes, we can absolutely start on site in 2 months or 3 months, because, there's so many influencing factors. So if you're contacting a designer early, at least then hopefully you've got the flexibility to be able to work towards the best, end result rather than a particular deadline that you're trying to pinpoint.
Yeah, no, great. So last question or two. When the project is all coming to an end, how does it sign off? It's just like, is it like that picture perfect room and you close the door and you open it and you're like, ta-da, and they're just amazed? Are they there right through the journey? Do you have some final things that are a surprise?
Yeah, so I would say, how I've always approached it is that clients will be there right through the journey. So really important for them to be involved. So even if they're not living at the property, because there's quite a bit of work going on, obviously really important to have those site meetings with the client and for them to see what's happening, if there's decisions that need to involve the client. Obviously, sometimes different clients are different in their approach. Sometimes they will want a designer to handle more of the decision making, but there will always be things that they do want to be involved with. So it's assessing that and knowing your client well enough on a particular project. But yeah, site meetings essential. So yeah, I mean, unlike the TV shows, yeah, I would not be working on a system reveal, where it's like the big reveal at the end. And then, but in terms of that very end, I mean, that can vary because I've had an increasing number of clients, I would say, over the years who started to be really interested in kind of accessorizing themselves. So just like I said, in the budgeting stage, I'd still really encourage people to be thinking about, well, if you do want that gallery wall, I mean, it's not going to be free. So yeah, it could easily cost £300 to have even just your most kind of standard frames, if you have enough of them. So just having those budgets in place and just, being able to then think about, if that's important to you to achieve those kind of finishing touches, to not feel like, that's a kind of a burden at the end financially, that it's been part of your plan the whole way along. But, there are a lot of people who actually want to look after that element themselves. So I wouldn't be then charging a fee to organise that and oversee that part. And then there's other people that will say, oh, I know what I'm like. If you leave it to me to hang pictures and buy cushions, even if it's in the budget, I'll never get around to it. Yeah. So in that case, we would do all the purchasing of like every last item and put it in. And, that can be so exciting then at the end. But, they're the types of projects where we have, I've this amazing handyman guy, he's called Simon. And, I've worked with him for like 10 years. And like myself and him have been like in properties till like midnight, like hanging the last pictures because it'll be a Friday. And I'm like, I really need to finish this job. I just need to move on. I've got new clients to meet next week. And, I just can't come back here one day, or the clients are about to move back in. And yes, of course, we can get some ladders in and hang pictures, but wouldn't it be great to just get them
have
up, get them
finalized.
done? And while he's, I'm marking them out and on the wall, and he's then up there, drilling and hanging, and I'd be like unpacking cushions and kind of, doing all that side to it. I've been really lucky over various points in the business. I've had, people who've worked with me as well, like junior designers in the business who've always been amazing in those kind of circumstances as well.
I can imagine, yeah, it's all that rush, maybe at the last minute to get everything finished off. And it always takes longer than you think. There's always a few more things than you'd anticipated. So, exactly. Final question, Audrey. Cost. How do people think about it? Is it very much dependent upon like a bespoke project by project basis, or is there sort of a rough estimate that people can use based on, I don't know, the number of rooms or the square footage, or whether it's including the furniture, excluding the furniture? Is there rough guides that people can sort of have an idea, or do you always recommend, the tried and tested, getting 3 quotes and choose the middle one?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Not
Can't really do that with an interior designer.
No. I'd say, not choosing just the middle priced one. I think all the other factors, like I mentioned about, your rapport with the person and, how well sort of their skills match what you're trying to achieve on your project. But yes, I do think it is a case of getting a few quotes, because designers will all work in different ways, like I said, and all charge in different ways. And there's an increasing amount of like variety in the types of interior design services you can engage with now. So there are more and more online services, obviously fueled more than ever now because of COVID restrictions. So, you could be dipping into some interior design help at a much more kind of minimal level in terms of, helping you with ideas. And then obviously if it's a much more kind of, hands-on approach, guiding you through the whole process and managing the project, then obviously you're going to be spending a lot more money, and those people would tend to be a lot more experienced and, charging more for that initial design stage than you may find an online service would be charging. But, you are going to be getting using a much more customized approach. So I think, it's probably the way I would say it is, if somebody tells you, oh, I'm a designer and I can do a room for, £100 or whatever it might be. I think the best way to think about this is, the cheaper it is, the less customized it's going to be. So in order for that person to make enough money in their business, they've got to be kind of using stock systems and stock ways of working. So you may not get that same feel of, it being totally suited to you in the best possible way. It may be a bit more generic. That may be okay for what you need, so that might be fine. For somebody else, the project might be more complex and they may feel like they get a much better result with a much more customized service, that's very much focused on their individual needs. And of course, you will pay more for that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And one thing as well that I've started to do when you get quotes, because they do seem to be very different, is really understanding what's included. And although sometimes there's a big disparity in prices, what you realize is, oh, but you're actually going to do all that for me. Yeah. So I can see that bit. And I assumed it was included in the other quote. But then when you ask them, like, oh, no, that would be an extra. So I would say to people, ask all the questions. Don't be afraid to get under the skin of what's included, because the last thing you want is, here's another surprise charge and another surprise charge. I hate surprise charges coming out of the woodwork. So really understand what's included and what's not included.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, if it is that cheaper service, it might be all you need. But as long as you've done that comparison and you understand what you can get, for the higher cost, and then you make that decision that, you're happier with the lower cost option. I think once you kind of understand that, the level of service and, what you end up with out of that obviously is going to be different, for a very understandable reason.
Yeah, no, it all makes sense. And I suppose what everybody wants to do is feel like you've done your proper due diligence and you've asked all the questions so that you're confident that you're going to get the outcome as expected with as few surprises as possible. And any surprises, may they all be on the upside.
Yes, absolutely.
Amazing. Well, Audrey, I now feel like I fully understand what an interior designer does. And as I said, it's a thing I think that a lot of people are fascinated about, but we make assumptions based on what we see on TV shows, but having that insight into real life and what actually happens is just fascinating. So thank you very much for sharing.
You're very welcome. If you enjoyed our podcast, we would be delighted if you could rate, review, and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. This will help others who are seeking home and furnishing advice and inspiration discover the DNA of home interiors. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at the DNA of Home Interiors.
If you are looking for inspiration and help in designing your home interiors, take a look at Audrey Whelan's masterclasses on audreywhelan.com/events. And don't forget to check out youfurnish.com, a search and comparison website which helps connect people with amazing furniture from over 100 retailers. We designed it to solve the problem we and thousands like us faced furnishing our homes. And now we are really excited that everyone can search, discover, compare and shop for their home all in one place.
Thank you to our sponsor checkatrade.com for their support in bringing this episode to you. And most importantly, thank you all for listening today.
We hope you can join us next time.